positive feedback loop. Three, two, one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Positive Feedback Loop podcast. This is Ray speaking, and we have Stephanie,
Hi,
our co-host,
everyone.
and Luis.
Hi. Hello.
Woohoo!
And this podcast, we talk about a variety of things, and oftentimes we disagree. So today's topic is the madness of genius. So we'll, talk about different types of geniuses that lived on in our history and how people perceived them and how they perceive themselves, really. And, one particular person that I think many people are familiar with is Albert Einstein. Steph, what do you think of Albert Einstein's?
I feel like this is a pop quiz.
Yeah, and also...
Like, what do you know about Albert Einstein?
He's become synonymous with the idea of genius, right? I mean, there's a whole... People call someone an Einstein if they're smart, or if they're trying to demean them, but for being smart. So, I don't know. I don't know about madness, though. I don't know if he was particularly mad. He was kind of a weird guy, but I don't know if I'd call him mad.
Let's maybe, so we, thought about Albert Einstein a bit, but maybe let's come into the present time and more contemporary geniuses that people might consider, genius. So some people say Steve Jobs is a genius. So those are like maybe more identifiable in current time.
Jobs is a divisive one. He steered Apple right at one point, but didn't at another. So does that make him a genius? He did come up with revolutionary products, but again, does that make him a genius?
So what makes someone a genius? Because I feel like it's an external perception. Like, you can't... Is being a genius an objective, absolute standard?
Well, I would say it's extraordinary intellect.
Actually, no. There is a standard they follow, like the IQ test that people take. I think if you score above a certain range or number, you're considered genius level. Isn't that right? Like, I think
there are a lot of people who don't take the IQ test, so how do you know they're geniuses?
Yeah, I think it's just extraordinary intellect. Yes, you can use an IQ test to measure it somewhat. It's not great for it, and it doesn't mean that anyone's actually going to do anything with that IQ. And even then, IQ is not a one-to-one correlation with all forms of intelligence.
So output, even. Like, you can be a genius, but if you don't have any output, does it really matter? So that's what I'm wondering. Is genius, as you said, Stephanie, is it just an external perception, or can it become internal? Because what happens, I think, is if a person internally perceives themselves as a genius, that's the point in which they become mad, and that's where they start to essentially deteriorate internally. What do you guys think?
I don't know. I think you can be a mad genius without realizing you're a genius. I think there's humility in madness sometimes.
And so we were talking a lot about mad geniuses, but there's not really that many people out there who are really smart and also are like cackling in an evil lair that with like lightning striking in the background. They have a monster they've just created. I mean, there's not that many people like that. It's more of a pop culture idea that genius comes at a cost, right?
Yeah, the madness we see in real life, I think, is this troubled genius. And I've seen it most of all in my study of artists. So I'm thinking of Michelangelo, who was troubled in many ways throughout his career, and especially the way his genius was treated. So I think of how people really revered him as a painter, and they wanted him to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and yet he considered himself a sculptor. And he really loved releasing forms from stone.
That's a great point because, first of all, genius is not just defined as intellectual, it's also creative, right? You have creative geniuses who are like great painters and things like that. You still ascribe genius to that. And you're right, but a lot of geniuses do have some form of dissatisfaction that helps power their art or whatever it is that they do. So a lot of them are afflicted with some form of condition in terms of depression and a whole host of psychological conditions. But I don't know how much higher than that you could say the population of geniuses is in terms of those conditions versus just average. I don't know.
So it's interesting because Leonardo da Vinci also comes to mind. And when you said, there's this level of dissatisfaction, it reminded me of historian Liana Bortolone in the 60s, who was writing about Da Vinci, and said, "Man is as uncomfortable today, faced with a genius, as he was in the 16th century. 5 centuries have passed, yet we still view Leonardo with awe." And others have said, his genius surpasses everything. That nature works miracles for a genius. And so the genius is uncomfortable or has a discomfort with what he or she is faced with, and then society has this uncomfortable or awe-inspiring reaction to a genius, and both are kind of out of sync with some level of comfort. So is genius something out of comfort?
Comfort for who?
For both sides, for the genius and for those who interface with the genius. I mean, we talk about mad geniuses who are both uncomfortable with themselves and make others uncomfortable in the fact that they're just out of the ordinary.
But there's also this like a perpetual cycle of, okay, people might consider me a genius, and now I have to basically defend that title, and then that they become more mad, self-doubting themselves. You go the other way and they become perpetually just egotistic, and so it's
In terms of the other things that we were mentioning about geniuses, I think a big aspect of it is that idea that people want genius to come at a cost, so that it helps the idea. It makes it feel if you're not a genius, it's okay because at least you didn't have to give up that thing. That or genius is incidental. How many times have you seen House on TV being a complete jerk to everyone, having so many situations based around the fact that he's a really hostile man, someone who's really aggressive and mean and just not fun to be around, but he's really smart. But the thing is that he never actually comes up with what's wrong, and this is all geniuses on TV for the most part. They never come up with like what's wrong based on like a process of a deductive process that eventually like, okay, well, it's not these things, therefore it's this. And we tested it and it's right. Okay, we got it. Good job, team. It's always, they try that for a bit and then he goes off to the bathroom and like, while he's in the bathroom, he's like, he touches the toilet paper and then like, that gives him a flashback of like the toilet paper, wait, trees, wait, he was near this forest that had this pollen that ended up killing him. That's what's doing it. And then he brushes in and saves him and gives him the perfect antidote to that pollen. Like that sort of thing. It's always incidental. It's the same way with Isaac Newton, right? The apple falling on his head. That's what gave him the idea, not years of intense study and dedication, which actually did it.
I've thought a lot about genius and the inspiration of genius. And this is very similar, I think, to our dream episode in the sense that I feel like there's a lot of inspiration that comes from God, and that we can't necessarily say that all genius is in us. Like, great going me, I'm a genius, I did it all myself, but that there's some divine help to those geniuses. And a lot say that the founding fathers of the United States were inspired divinely in some way, and they even say it, many of them themselves. They look to thank the inspiration of God for that. So I wonder if genius is, like you said, Luis, like getting degrees, learning, getting the education, working hard for it. Is it innate? You're born with it. Do you develop it? Is it a natural process? Does nature do miracles happen in nature to help guide you and create a genius out in you? And then there's this fourth, is God helping and inspiring normal men and women to do extraordinary things? And it's probably a mixture of one or more.
I think a lot of it has to do with curiosity. Geniuses tend to be very curious about nature, and your argument about God, I guess, can be said, nature can be in your view, maybe the product of God. So maybe in that way, curiosity of nature, thus being the curiosity of God, is the part that helps inspire geniuses.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about inspiration, there's a lot of humility that can be misinterpreted as to the actual source of inspiration. I don't know what inspires certain people to be a certain way. I think that geniuses are not just like you can't just get educated and then thus you're a genius. No, I think that there is something inherent to some people that allows them to go that extra step after they've refined their abilities. Those are people who are geniuses, but I don't think you need to be a genius to be good at your job or to be great or even historically great. Not everyone who's made a name for themselves and been famously successful or even unsuccessful but still changed the face of history some way was a genius. It just happens that the ones that you tend to remember the most were. So I don't know what it is that makes a genius, but I know that it is largely not something it's largely something you're born with, and then have the good luck to be able to have an opportunity to refine it in some way.
I have a friend who studies gifted children and their needs. This kind of goes to your thought that a lot of it can be innate. A lot of children are just born very gifted. And so, like you said, I don't think necessarily everyone can be educated to genius status. Maybe it's that some are naturally just gifted in that capacity. Unless we can define genius more broadly, then maybe with a whole ton of effort, anybody could be educated to the level of genius, like genius leader, someone who has genius level leadership or genius level listening skills or genius level cheerfulness and making others happy, that they just know much more easily how to make those around them happier. If we go beyond just intellect and creative abilities or making something, then maybe it can be taught. But if we're just talking about intellectual genius, I think you're right that there are some that are just more gifted than others. And it's been interesting seeing how people have been studying how to excite gifted children and keep them engaged so they don't get bored in school.
So yeah, Stephanie, that's interesting. Did you happen to ask whether or not the parents of these individual children are highly educated, or what kind of background they come from? I'm trying to think of like genius can be hereditary or not.
There are a lot of children who are very gifted and their parents are not. Sometimes I'm sure it goes both ways. I don't know the literature. I think there's genetics in everything, I guess. But there are children who do not have gifted parents. But there are other factors in the environment. They could have very good teachers. They could have friends that influence them. It could be the books they're reading, the TV they're watching, anything around them that teaches them.
I mean, all this talk about genius makes me think, well, isn't it all just really relative to the other people around you at the time? Because maybe genius is just a way to define people who kind of see the future a little bit better, or are able to predict new technologies based on existing technologies in a more creative way.
I think that's one type of genius, but I think that genius for the most part is not something that applies to literally everything. Few are the multidisciplinary geniuses that are great at everything they do. For the most part, genius, you're like a genius at one thing. And oftentimes some of the most famous people are famous because they did one thing extremely well, right? And then we tend to associate that with them just being smart across the board and ask them for, value their inputs in things that they may not be quite as great at. So, for example, how often have you to associate famous chess player, right, with just being a smart guy in general, right? A chess player is probably a really smart guy. Why don't we ask him see how he applies himself in other things? But for the most part, they're just really good at chess because that's what they practice and refined and just become amazing at. So trying to get them to, solve political problems is probably not the best use of their abilities.
Although with chess, maybe it will be, Chess is very
strategy, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but with chess, there's only so many types of players, and with politics and life, there's a lot of players, and they're all
Well, that's the point. It's
Very
a
good
different.
point.
It's a different understanding and
it's unpredictable.
different practice. Yeah, it's not the same discipline. Doesn't the skills that allow you to be successful in one don't necessarily translate to the other.
Luis,
So
you remind me
yeah.
of a TV show that I watched when I was a kid called The Pretender. And I don't remember who the actor was, but he was so smart that in every episode he'd pretend to be someone else to go like save the world or something. So
Yeah.
he in one episode would be a doctor, and so he'd quickly like read up on some like surgery manuals and then know how to do surgery, and then he'd be the doctor doing surgeries. And then the next scene, he'd like quickly open a book, learn Portuguese in 15 minutes, and then speak Portuguese. And so he was this idea of the multidisciplinary genius that you're talking about that's pretty impossible, which is probably why it's on TV, of the person who could do anything.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's completely impossible for someone to be that, where they're very good at a lot of things.
But it's rare.
It's rare, and it's extremely rare, and on top of that, you have to take into account the fact that, like, you know, few are the people that can go into something completely blind and never having done it before, and then be great at it.
Yeah.
So, or at least be better than the person who studied the most at that thing.
There's this, who is it, Malcolm Gladwell, who says if you put 10,000 hours into anything, you can be a master at it.
Yeah. Oh, I saw Malcolm Gladwell yesterday, actually. He was at the conference I was at, but
really?
Anyway, yeah.
Did he talk?
Yeah, he talked. He hosted a panel on the tipping point in the healthcare system and the New York biotech community and how it's growing and things like that. So it was interesting.
Are there any geniuses you think in the healthcare industry? I feel like that's such a troubled industry.
I mean, right now, yeah. I mean, there's tons of people doing really smart things. The problem is there's a lot of mediocre minds, let's put it, that are also related. So Albert Einstein once said, "Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." So you can imagine regulators, lots of big companies that have interests, pharmaceutical companies that have specific, interest in continuing their operations as they are, or at least surviving digital disruption and things like that. So yes, I'm sure there's genius. There definitely is. Lots of cool companies coming out.
Wow, you remind me a lot of Galileo Galilei, where he fought against basically like religious regulators of sorts when he said, "Hey, look through the telescope. We're not the center of the universe."
With genius, a lot of times it takes extraordinary risk to be.
It's like not just knowing the truth and finding it. It's not just that part of genius, but also the fighting for it and the believing in it. The, like you said, at all odds, pushing against the mediocre
minds.
the mediocre minds who are not necessarily willing to accept new truth or truth that already existed, just undiscovered truth.
But does that make you a genius, or does it make you famous? I think it being a genius does not require you to be actually get something done. So long as you can be a genius and not be successful. That's what I'm trying to get at. You could be an unsuccessful genius, and you could have not tried to fight whatever. Maybe that the oppressive regimes are the things that caused you to not be able to be successful, and you weren't willing to fight that any further.
I think there's a lot of quashed genius. I feel like this also goes back to the parents' conversation. I think there are children who, in the school setting they're in, they're geniuses, and that starts to get crushed just because of whatever educational system they might be in, and they never realize their full potential because they haven't had educators who have helped them do that, which is sad, but happens to children.
One person I thought of when you said genius people who might have not become famous. This person is kind of famous, Nikola Tesla. So, inventor of alternating current and the induction motor and Tesla coil. So he kind of became famous, but he was kind of underground as well. He wasn't the Thomas Edison of the day. He was more underground, and I think that he was totally okay with that. And
I don't know about that. I feel like he was underground largely because of the Thomas Edison of his day, who was Thomas Edison, who was a notorious, unfriendly individual, did a lot of really messed up stuff to get ahead, including basically putting down Tesla to a degree. Although Tesla himself was pretty crazy. I think there was something with him on a pigeon. What was it? Oh yeah, he fell in love with a pigeon. That was it.
The madness of genius.
The madness of genius. And with that, I think we're going to take it to commercial break, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Thank you, guys.
2 weeks ago, I had to water my plants, prune them, give them nutrients, and make sure they had the right amount of sun. Well, not anymore. Thanks to Genius Garden, my plants take care of themselves. Are your plants lacking in intelligence? You've had them for years and they still haven't learned to take care of themselves? I know. Evolution is so slow, am I right? With Genius Garden, you get a whole kit of genius, including drops, made from the tears of child geniuses as they laugh-cry while watching Frasier. In 2 weeks, your plants will be smart enough to water, feed, and prune themselves. Just make sure you don't use more than 2 drops per day or they'll be too smart for comfort. Genius Garden. Grow some smarty plants.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to our commercial. Welcome back. We are talking about the madness of genius, and I had a question to pose to our co-host. What is your favorite genius on TV or in a movie that you've seen portrayed? You know, whether it be, what's his name on that Big Bang Theory show?
Sheldon.
Sheldon?
Yes. Or is it, one of those movies like Alan Turing, the Turing movie? What was your favorite depiction of a genius in popular culture?
Dumb and Dumber. Kidding. Kidding.
I mean, you could talk about creative. I mean, comedic genius, but I don't know if I classify that movie for it.
No. It's interesting because there are a lot of depictions of.
There's so many.
Of intellectual genius and of creative genius. There's also, Mahatma Gandhi as some sort of a political or social genius. People just exceptionally gifted at something. It makes me wonder if there are geniuses that are quieter, that aren't famous, that we don't laud. They just remain hidden. Scientists who have discovered a foundational principle that has been the foundation for greater scientific discoveries, and they go unnoticed or unknown. People who have patents that are smaller but that make up larger discoveries and inventions.
For example, in terms of the structure of DNA, we had Watson and Crick, who are most famously known for that discovery. But there was also, I think, a key influential woman that was involved with the discovery of the structure of DNA.
Yes, and academia has long had problems with properly giving women credit. This is a problem. And there is indeed a long history of...
Rosalind Franklin, that's her name.
But the story of this goes far back. I mean, look at the way that women have been treated in science for forever. Not only being denied access to science, but people who make valid contributions. I mean, the woman behind She Sells Seashells by the Seashore tongue twister. Behind that tongue twister, which I guess just twisted my tongue. I can't pronounce it properly. that woman, she was a famous person who delivered a lot of fossils that changed the way that anthropology was done in the 1800s. And she's gotten basically no credit for it, right? Eventually, she was respected enough by the people who knew her personally that they did some small things to help her, but she didn't go down in the history books the way that the people who then benefited off of her discoveries benefited or were remembered. But I don't know if I would call that genius. I guess that's more just people ignored in science or in any industry. There are unknown geniuses, though. I definitely agree.
Should we think about developing a platform to match geniuses with the work that they do best?
isn't that like career matching?
Yeah, maybe they should get on LinkedIn.
Right?
Yeah. I was thinking about women artists. It's not just science, but there are a lot of fields like art and even cooking. The high-level chefs was very much a men's world. Now women can be chefs and be known for it, but also women artists. I think of Frida Kahlo and her influence in Mexican culture, using a very simple folk art style to kind of make people think differently. Some women have such an influence even on creating geniuses. Think of motherhood. So Mother's Day is coming up. A lot of geniuses can thank their mothers for helping them grow and learn. And I am by no means a genius, but I do think of how I loved painting. And so my mother would actually take me out and buy me canvases and paints. And I even remember we tore up the carpet in my bedroom, and they were going to recarpet it. But I was allowed to just tape down my cotton paper right onto the floor and paint right on the floor as kind of a stretcher for my canvas of my bedroom. And so my mother was very much willing to facilitate my learning. And I think there are a lot of people who have been very successful intellectually and creatively due to mothers who had recognized their gifts and had helped them grow those gifts.
Absolutely. I think that's, just motherhood, even fatherhood, just parenthood in general plays a huge role on the child's ability.
Not to exclude fathers.
Right.
But I'm just thinking about Mother's Day.
The fact that we're around Mother's Day is what I think brought that on.
Yeah.
No one's a genius in a vacuum, I would say. Like, without other people, it doesn't really ultimately matter. And there's no point of reference. And it's also those people that help foster genius and foster creativity. And
no, it makes sense. It's environment, it's people. I mean, really, genius then can be seen as a collective of sorts. I mean, genius also builds on other things. Those who are philosophers now build on the genius of philosophers of the past.
There's the whole standing on the shoulders of giants bit.
Right. And so there's an element to that it's like an element of gratitude or humility to realize that no one does live in a vacuum and can think I've done this all on my own.
And actually, that's an interesting point, because it's interesting how the way that society is moving, we're moving towards more access to technology and information for more people, more easy access to the tools that allow for creative and intellectual output. More of the inputs are available to more people across the world, and we have a huge population at this point. We're talking 7 billion people, and it's only going to grow for at least the conceivable future until eventually it plateaus. Hopefully, at like 10 billion, I think is what we're projected to plateau at. But
population?
Yeah.
Yep.
But in terms of the fact, this is what human history is. It's beginning with a few, passing down knowledge to slightly more, and then those slightly more building on that knowledge and passing it down to slightly more. And then as you have more people in the population able to use that input to create creative outputs, you can solve more problems that society has. So it allows for this iteration, this cycle of growth for humanity. And this has been one of the tools to our success so far. Or, depends on your point of view. Our success could have come at terrible costs to others. So it's up to the point of view as to whether we are successful or not as a species. And that's a whole other conversation.
Well, I think we've been pretty successful so far. And, you can only measure success with a reference of time, beginning and end. So eventually there'll be an unsuccessful point, probably, right? You can argue. But so far,
as a species,
yeah.
There are definitely points in history that have been trickier for parts of the species than others, and it obviously there are it's not all a straight line up
Yeah,
right?
people
There's
refer to
been-
the Dark Ages as this, dark time in history when development stalled, and then you have the Renaissance or this rebirth where people got back on track. So I think you're right,
Well,
Luis.
also-
It's not linear.
And keep in mind that wasn't the entire world wasn't going through the Dark Ages.
It's just Europe.
It was just it's just a chunk of the world. The rest of the world was doing their own thing. They were fine. Same thing with the Renaissance. Europe was doing great. A lot of the world was not. It's this give and take, and it's interesting how just the fact our population grows and that it has more tools available to it because it's grown and is able to utilize that extra knowledge and extra ability, especially now with the internet, where we could be even adding artificial agents to the situation that could be doing thinking for us. I mean, that's insane.
I mean,
so then
that's when you have...
What will genius be when we have computers that are smarter than any human? Will it matter if you're a genius?
Well, I think it'll matter in how you leverage those technologies, right? Humans will always be augmented by the technology that. Well,
I'm not talking about having a computer that the genius is using. I'm talking about having an artificial intelligence.
Right.
Let's say you create an artificial intelligence that's its own being in a sense, and it's not there. Well, originally, these AIs could have been built with the express purpose of helping us. Eventually, they'll be their own consciousness, right? That's the idea behind one of the great fears of humanity. And if you have this other creature that is living and thinking and is way smarter than anyone in the world could even fathom to be, what is a genius then?
Yeah, then the artificial intelligence will be augmented by the humans a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe, if we're lucky, maybe they'll keep us around.
Well, I like to think of it as we'll kind of become like pets and just like emotional creatures, and they're just like, just scurrying around and like laughing and climbing things all the time.
Doesn't sound like a bad life.
Sounds awful. I feel like we're gonna come to a soup.
So I believe we have souls that will always be a step ahead of anything that could be artificially created. So I've never experienced that fear, but I do understand that fear, especially if it really is just the brain capacity of a person and their conscience. I guess I've had to grapple with that as I listen to the debate and see both of these sides of could machines really take over humanity? I mean, it's been the subject of many films for sure.
Well,
it's also been the subject of a lot of our podcasts.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But okay, I have a question about this because I find this assumption interesting. The idea that, regardless of religious beliefs or whatever, but the idea that humans are inherently superior to machines because we have a quote-unquote soul, right? I'm assuming the soul is a stand-in for a lot of the time for consciousness or something below consciousness, right? This other thing that gives us our unique humanness. But will that really matter if the machine is still stronger, faster, and smarter than you?
So I actually believe that the soul is not what makes us human, but that our humanness or mortality is a shell for the soul. So the soul is eternal and divine, meaning
it's also interdimensional. It's interdimensional.
I would agree.
Yeah,
to some degree.
No, it's just reminding me. I don't mean to laugh. I was remembering our other podcast where we've got into the interdimensional nature of existence.
Are we cycling through the same topics? Oh no.
No, it's a good topic.
It's because we love these topics. But I do think about the divinity of the soul, that we are God's children and therefore the offspring of divinity and therefore divinity ourselves to some degree. And so it's like we're divine creatures here on earth kind of learning how to be mortal, to be resurrected someday as an immortal being. And so I feel like that is the superiority over the machine that really, even if the machine develops artificial intelligence to regenerate itself or fix itself or find new raw materials to make a new bolt that's missing, that's rusting, I think still there's a limit to that and a limit to this autonomy of the machine that it's like an asymptote,
Yeah. So you think it would be impossible to create a machine that could that could be perfectly impossible to discern from a human without actually like puncturing the skin.
Right.
Well, no, you can even puncturing the skin potentially. You can, let's say like.
Well, let's not talk about
what
the
I'm
actual,
trying to say.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right, but I think what's gonna happen, the difference between a real human and a robot, let's say, is there's this human connection to the past. So like we are actually in a way connected to the past in ways that we don't understand through our biological artifacts. So our DNA is part of this artificial or this historical artifact that we carry with us all the time, and it continuously develops. Every generation there's a new iteration of these biological machines that are inside of us, right? So I think future robots, they're gonna have this deep learning and ability to access information from their cloud masses of that data, but it's not gonna have the time frame that we do. So they're gonna have a lot of volume, but it's not gonna have the.
Oh, I get it.
But okay,
content.
so
Yeah.
But maybe it won't matter. So
That's
maybe
fascinating.
They can catch up. So will they be able to catch up faster than maybe because we're just taking a really long time? This whole evolution thing is pretty slow. Maybe they can.
Like they can go do more in less
adapt
time.
much faster. They
Right.
can adapt much faster. So that's an interesting question for me. I don't know.
Ray, we've disagreed on this before. I think that
It's our job.
that DNA does not hold any significant properties of, other than just being a biological machine, really. That's what it is. It's a blueprint that it is connected to the past in a sense, but not in anything that's magical in any ability. It doesn't have any particular magical abilities. It's just a blueprint
I don't know, man.
has remnants of previous. It's constantly iterating on the original, right? And each iteration has added more and become better. Well, not each iteration, but over time, the generations have allowed for a DNA that creates us, right? Or the blueprint to lead to us. That's not to say, first of all, evolution doesn't have an endpoint. There's no best evolution. It's just different, and we fit a biological niche that helped us get to where we are now, and we were lucky for that because our advantage was we were able to cooperate, and we had brains that allowed us to be able to pass down information and accrue knowledge. But I don't think that the DNA itself, the actual protein, or the actual molecules, do much other than that. I don't think they hold any additional information that we can't extract, that we can extract in some way while we walk around life.
Unless there's some matter that's more fine than what we currently know about, that's carried within molecules like DNA.
But then how would that interface with the way that you perceive the world? It would have no impact for the most part. Even if there's something below it, or even if DNA did have magical powers, your body doesn't have, your
it
body
does
doesn't
have
actually.
magical powers.
I like how you say it has magical powers, which is funny.
But your body doesn't have the ability to process magical powers, right? It doesn't have like proteins that grab magical power and bring it to your brain and then like.
Well, you don't know that. You don't know that. Technically,
if science finds that, if we do research and you can find any article that will support that, you know what, you will convert me instantly.
Hold on, listen.
I think it's a cool idea, though.
Which, just summarizing that, my point is not so much that I don't believe in the magical power of DNA. I think that even if there were to be one, I think that it wouldn't impact the ability of artificial intelligence to compete with humans. I mean, look at the fact that they already compete with us, and they're very early in their development. We've been around for how many million? Thousands of years. I think 20,000 years we've been around as like societies, not just random tribes of pre-modern human. We've been around for a while now, and computers have been around for less than a century. And in that time, they have been able to compete with humans in certain fields, in certain niches, but they can compete with us. So who is to say that they will not be able to compete with us much more in everything in 100 years? If intellectual capability is the sole ability of humans that lets us stand out, and our ability to take information, process it, and do something actionable with it and be able to cooperate with others, then machines could definitely take that niche. And whether they could do that and also have consciousness is a really interesting question, because consciousness is impossible to define. Now, whether that means that if you have this special DNA power, I don't think that even if you did, that would give you a one-up on machines in general.
I also don't think that the technology that we imagine now is like the limit. Like that our imagination is as far as we can go. I mean, back in the day, hundreds of years ago, people couldn't imagine airplanes. Like they just didn't. I mean, they could imagine like Icarus with wings, like flying, which is maybe hang gliding,
Yeah.
But nobody really could imagine that. We now imagine AI and the extremities of AI that could possibly be, and I don't think that's the limit either. Which both, I mean, that goes to your point that there's much more they can achieve, but I also think, well, humans created that. And I think a creator, in essence, if they have the consciousness to imagine it and create it, they can create and imagine and do even more. I think it's kind of this infinite trajectory.
Agreed. That's why when you say something like the magic properties of DNA, in essence, it's quite magical to know the intricacies of how, a protein or a DNA can produce a protein and have that protein unfold and refold and change properties depending on temperature and create structures and scaffolding and then organs, and then create this like organ called the brain that allows us to even think of the properties in which it actually happens in the first place. So it's very, very much a magical thing. In the year 200 AD, let's imagine this podcast. How would it work? Can you do that? Can you imagine just creating a podcast or just driving? Is that magic? People at the time, the people who thought about it were both mad and maybe genius. I don't know. All right, and I think with that, just want to leave our audience with these thoughts that we discussed today. And please, I am asking you, as one of your favorite podcast hosts, join us, subscribe on SoundCloud, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. We very much appreciate it. We will listen to your requests and listen to your recommendations. And with that, everybody, thank you and stay crazy.
Stay crazy.